have a confession to make. I am terrified of octopuses.
We'll go with vampire. That'll be safer.
I think what I have learned is that I enjoy vampires when they're gay.
Octopus fact time.
Octopus facts!
I mean, that's what we do on this podcast. We just make stuff up with a good argument.
We are the octopus, and the octopus is us.
In the face of horror, we often default to being normal about it.
I mean, how many times have either of us watched a film or something and identified with the monster?
Is it spooky? Is there a castle? Did a woman faint? Ah, it must be gothic.
Metaphors and pretty sentences and a giant monster at the end.
Welcome to The Vampire and the Octopus,
A series by Book Club with Julia
and Victoria. Two friends who often correspond in either emojis or 15-minute voice notes. There will be no in-between.
I feel called out. And we would like to be your book friends.
This is a podcast with the books we just can't shut up about.
This week, we're reading The Mountain and the Sea by Ray Naylor about a research team in the dystopian future studying unusual octopus activity, in which there is a surprising lack of mountains. Not relevant to the plot or today's discussion, it just bothers me. They live in a ship, not in a mountain. What is the mountain? We'll never know.
The mountain of the unknown.
I guess, yeah, it must be a metaphor somewhere, but it's not clear.
It's like you write a good title and then you try to write the story and you're like, can't list the title, it's a pretty good one. Maybe it's supposed to be a mountainous island.
Maybe it is. Does Vietnam have mountains? But they're not in the sea.
Well, is an island in the sea or on the sea? I would say in.
Oh, that's complicated. Okay. Fair enough. So it's referring to the island. That's a stretch for me, but I guess, yeah, an island is in the sea. Okay, anyway, we need to move on, but I just thought, it really bugs me. I'm like, what is the title about?
This is, heads up, if you haven't read the book, you are welcome to listen in, but there will be spoilers ahead. We have, I guess, spoiled the fact that there is an island that may either be in or on the sea, but we'll be talking about the full extent of the plot. So if you do care about spoilers, this is your official warning. Hit pause, come back after you've read it if you want to wait until you've read it. Otherwise, welcome to the party.
Welcome. We did a ton of research for this series, so we have been posting bonus content alongside our episodes throughout this series. So if you'd like to join the club, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to see what bonus content we have posted for this one.
So, Julia, you've picked The Mountain and the Sea to be the third novel of your octopus research project you're presenting to us all. How did you pick this book and why?
You recommended this book to me because Varun read it and your brother read it, and I was nearing my wit's end with trying to find good octopus books that weren't all just quiet, sad, contemplative stories. You know, I was like, I need a real monster story. At least one. I tried this one out, and lo and behold, it was a very easy, fun read. I did have a great time. I want to start, before I get into the meat of this episode and complain about this book a lot, I want the world to know I did enjoy myself. The world building was fun, though kind of incomplete. I liked guessing how the different storylines were intersect, which not quite as satisfying as I had hoped. There were some good surprises and reveals that I mostly guessed correctly, but that's always fun. And I love, the nerdy octopus language shit. It kind of felt because all of his reference books about octopuses were things that I had also been reading while I was reading this. And so it was talking to my friend about what we were learning. I mean, there's sections of this book that just feel like they're exact paraphrases of Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith. And he does reference it in the acknowledgments. So it was kind of fun. We were nerding out a little bit. But it was also ideologically frustrating. So, how about you?
To be honest, Vern recommended this book to me in November when he read it. My brother recommended it to me in December when he read it. You picked it out for the show, gave me many months to read it.
Yeah.
I read it in 4 days before we recorded because I got sucked into R.F. Kuang's The Poppy Wars trilogy, books 1 and 2. I have not read 3. I had to hold myself back. I had to finish The Mountain and the Sea and get through this episode recording before I'm allowed to touch that one. But then I also found Jasmine Guillory, one of my favorite romance authors, one of her books at a little free library. And I was like, this is a perfect plane read. I read it literally all in one plane ride. So needless to say, I took a little break from The Vampire and the Octopus and I came back just in time. Overall, my experience, I enjoyed it as well. I thought the world building was very interesting. I was moving very quickly, I will say. When you have to read at least 25% of the book every day for 4 or 5 days, it moves pretty quickly. But I also love just being in the world and in the world that Naylor created. I thought the perspectives of the characters were interesting. I really liked the kind of mishmash. I mean, it definitely sits in sci-fi, really looking at biology and language, but it's also got kind of these thriller aspects. I liked the intrigue of the Rustem storyline, the hacker. I liked the drama of Aiko's storyline on the AI fishing trawler, and the interspersement of these kind of very different storylines that all kind of weave together, I think balanced out the more slow-paced scientific research plotlines of Ha's story, which, as much as I love really sitting in with the nuance of how do we communicate when we don't have anything in common with an alien or a different species, or these first contact kind of stories, they can get really slow because a lot of the plot is people sitting around talking and thinking and researching. So to intersperse that with
staring at pictures
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah. To intersperse that with more fast-paced plot lines, more like high-stakes life and death situations of the other two, I think was really smart move on the author's part. My main complaint is that the ending felt really slowed down with philosophical monologuing. Literally, there is a final battle scene, like a high-stakes battle going on. Like many sci-fi books have that big last thing, but we're mostly in Ha's perspective, where she's intentionally trying not to think about what's going on outside and still hypothesizing about the octopus worldview, which is interesting, but doesn't, like, her realizations doesn't move the plot along. Because at this point, we're in the ending. Then what is a fascinating choice that I don't think I would have made is the author does tell us how the battle went down, but in summary. And in fact, the battle was with the octopuses, which was so fascinating. And I'm like, why weren't we there for that? Why weren't we watching what Alton Sensei was doing in that moment? Because the reveal felt kind of lessened because we don't get Ha and Evrim's like emotional response to it. We just get them being told what happened. And then they continue to monologue. Anyways, so I was also frustrated that Aiko and Sun don't actually meet Ha and Evrim. There's like a hint that Alton Sensei is like interacting with Aiko, but like in the briefest of mentions. So even though the whole novel's driving towards these storylines colliding, and we do get like Rustum's intersection with Evrim in a really, really awesome way. I liked how those storylines intersected. There's just like a few things lacking for me in the ending, which ultimately like puts this book on like, oh, I was going to rank this as one of my favorite sci-fi when I got into the first half of it. But as I got into the second half, I was like, oh, it's interesting. I'd recommend it because I would like to talk to people about it. And that's why I'm excited to talk about it on the show, because I do think there's so much in here to unpack and to explore and to help us think about the world, which is some of my favorite things that sci-fi can do for us.
But it's clunky. It does not stick the landing.
It's clunky.
And it's frustrating because it promises so much that's so exciting, and you're like so on board for where it's going, and then it isn't going where you think it's going, and then it just like at the end. And you're just like, what? What? Okay. And especially if you don't agree with all the monologues they're giving, then it's really painful. But I think in order to get into all of the monologues and the worldview that is being presented to us and whatever, we do really need the author's backstory, because I think it has a huge influence here. So tell us a bit about Mr. Ray Naylor. What a combination, like Rene. I wonder if anyone calls him Rene. I would if I were his friend. Hey, tell us about Rene.
Yeah, so I'm kind of mashing up two of his Ray Naylor's like official biographies, one with Locust magazine, one on his website. Some of these sentences I'm pulling straight from there. Ray Naylor was born in 1976 in Alma, Quebec, Canada. And when he was 3 years old, his family moved to California. He attended UC Santa Cruz, where he studied modern literature and developed an interest in semiotics. He graduated in 99.
That's like peak semiotics era.
I didn't know semiotics era, so thank you for the flavor text.
Yeah, it's not as popular now. Like, it's kind of on its way out, but that's like when it was at its height in popularity and influence, so...
And according to Google, semiotics, the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation.
The practice of semiotics, like as a theory is a bit, is still around, but like semiotics as like a practice where you analyze signs and symbols with very particular analytical structures, almost like proofs in math, is like kind of fallen out of favor.
And when you say signs and symbols, do you mean like literally the way we write like the Latin alphabet to mean things, or like how we in say like Western Christian tradition use like a cross, but others might use a cross with a body on it, like those kind of dissection of like the cultural difference of symbols?
So in semiotics, everything is a sign. Everything. And they find regular objects that have been analyzed to death kind of boring. So, like, they would find a cross to be a boring sign and a not very interesting sign. Like, they prefer, like, a contentious sign. I wrote my entire paper about the sign of an autism diagnosis.
Like, what that would symbolize for a person and symbolize in our culture.
And how it is perceived by different groups of people. And using these very bizarre analytical structures where you literally have to fill them in like a puzzle. They just got really into graphic analysis for a hot second, and everything became like...
What if we made little flowcharts and like symbol thingies instead of writing words?
Yeah, it's so silly. So it's not just like a linguistic thing, it's like a tool for analyzing everything.
This is so fascinating. I was going to ask you to like, in one sentence, describe to our listener what semiotics was, and I did not even know. I didn't know how well versed. I did not know you had an entire course in this.
Yeah!
My honorary degree in anthropology that you gave me, not honorary degree, what did you call it? Degree by proxy.
Degree by proxy.
It feels like I didn't quite earn it. I didn't follow along for your semiotics class. So, he developed an interest in semiotics.
Great.
During his undergrad in Santa Cruz. After that, he lived in the Bay Area and Toronto and worked various odd jobs before joining the Peace Corps and moving to Turkmenistan in 2003. He learned Russian there and worked in Russia for an international NGO specializing in educational exchange. He lived in Moscow, then Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, from where he joined the U.S. Foreign Service in 2010. He subsequently served in Vietnam, again in Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, and Kosovo, living abroad for 20 years before returning to the U.S. in 2022.
Wow.
While he was in Vietnam, he was Environment, Science, Technology, and Health Officer at the U.S. Consulate. Ray also served as the International Advisor to the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which my favorite thing ever is that administration is called NOAA. Like, how fun is that? He continues to do interesting things in this area. He lives in DC. He is a diplomatic fellow at the George Washington University. He lives with his wife and their daughter Lydia and 2 cats. So he's had this like extensive career. He went and got his master's in global diplomacy at SOAS, the University of London. So he's both lived and worked abroad in so many different places and studied abroad. So doing all these things, I'm like, wow, he has a very full career. That seems like he's doing a lot. Sounds like he decided to write a novel. And then I looked at his publication history, and he's been writing for a very long time. And he's published a lot. I'm like, how do you have time, dude? But his earliest publications from the late 90s and through the 2000s, but he really got into publishing speculative fiction in 2015 and is a prolific short story writer, also writes poetry and some more mainstream lit fic. He writes opinion pieces, he did a comic, but The Mountain and the Sea was his first full-length novel, published in 2022, and got some pretty strong attention from the sci-fi world. So he won the Locus Award for Best First Novel. He was a finalist for the LA Times Book Awards, Ray Bradbury Prize, the Nebula, and the Kitschkis. So that it got a lot of attention right away. I think some of the reviews I read from the more casual reader or book reviewer, like you and I, follow some of these similar things of like really interesting stuff happening. I like the characters. I think he's like saying something interesting about like climate change, but kind of lost me that they don't all tie together in the end, or critiques on kind of gets lost in the sauce and the plot kind of, you know, becomes secondary for much of the novel. So I think we are in similar company in how it was received, but overall positive attention. And he does have a novella coming out this year called The Tusks of Extinction. But yeah, so that's a little bit about Ray Naylor. And you can kind of see, as you walk us through this summary just now, like all these different pieces of his background and expertise and how he's just like brought it all together to write this novel based on a lot of places he's lived and like cultures he's been in and topics like climate change and biological science research that have been fascinating to him for much of his career.
There are 3 storylines that we follow in this book. So the main one that we're going to spend the most time on is Dr. Ha, a Vietnamese biologist who's an expert in cephalopods and who wrote a book speculating about octopus consciousness and sociality. She's called to a remote outpost in Vietnam that has been claimed by a giant megacorporation called Dyanima for conservation research. And it's actually a place that she had visited before as a child. So she was called in because a video was captured of a group of octopuses living in a shipwreck and trying to communicate with humans with a visual form of speech on their skin, and she's being asked to decipher it. Very similar premise to Arrival / The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. Very, very similar. Her team has 2 other people on it. The only successful human-passing android named, I've been calling him Evrim? I'm gonna call him Evrim, who does use they-them pronouns because gender is a human construct. So, Evrim, who was made by the founder of the megacorporation Dyanima, and Altan Setseg, a Mongolian war hero who is trained to command drone armies in Tibet, as she, like, floats in a tank and, like, talks to them. So they're both kind of android-ish. They're somewhere on the android spectrum, you might say. And she likes to use I feel like the best summary of her character, she likes to use a broken translator that doesn't translate her accurately because it creates emotional distance between her and the people she's communicating with. And I'm like, that's a great character choice because it says everything you need to know. These 3 slowly work together to try and decipher what the octopus crew on the island are trying to communicate, which in turns out they're saying, get the fuck out. That's basically what they've been trying to tell the humans this whole time.
Yeah, one of my favorite little moments is when they got a symbol and Ha is like, oh yeah, it's along the lines of, you know, stay away, like get away from us, whatever. And Altan Setseg is like, my favorite translation is fuck off.
Yeah. So they interpret this visual language by looking for the visual patterns that are relevant to the life of an octopus. That might be experiential foundations for their symbols. So the shape of their octopus gardens in front of their homes, their dens, the shapes of their eyes, etc., etc. These 3 are very different, very distrustful people who've all had, you know, their traumas. They're all very lonely people who have to kind of learn how to work together in order to understand and protect the octopus's home, which has been terrorized by climate change and overfishing for so long that, you know, they don't really like people because they want to try and build a relationship that's more trusting. However, they are willing to brutally destroy fishing vessels with humans on them in order to protect the octopus's, like, area. So it's a little complicated. These 3 end up confronting the founder of the megacorporation, Dr. Minervu Doter Chan. They confront her because she set up their project in order to control them and the octopuses, not to build a connection. And then Altan Setseg ends up taking over the area for the nation of Tibet. She was kind of being a double agent and offering this crew the chance to continue their work under the purview of Tibet, which doesn't feel any better to me, but sure. Okay, so then the other 2 side stories that are sort of happening at the same time that kind of interweave and impact this central story. We have Rustam. He's a Russian hacker. He's like the best hacker in the world, I guess. He's very lonely most of the time. He feels more comfortable with computers. And he is tasked with finding a weakness in the most complicated computer brain he's ever seen in his life. And he keeps getting lost in it. And while he's working on it, a mysterious organization tries to kill him. And another one tries to save him from the one who's trying to kill him. And in the end, he realizes that the brain he's trying to hack is Evrim, because it's like equivalent to in complexity to a human mind, but it has seams of places that it was kind of put together. And so he's able to communicate with Evrim to let them know that he's making sure no one ever has the ability to, quote unquote, hack into Evrim's mind again. He knows Evrim's mind so well, and he's like, this is a lot like ours, and so we need to respect Evrim's autonomy as another kind of being. This is perhaps a theme, if you will. Okay, and then we have Aiko. Aiko is a Japanese computer scientist fresh out of college, looking for work. He's in Ho Chi Minh Autonomous Zone for a job interview. But he ends up getting kidnapped and put to work on a fishing trawler that's run by like an AI system. And the ship used to be manned by other machines, but they broke down too easy, and so now they use human slaves. It's very disturbing. He befriends a man on the ship named Sun, who talks about his home in Vietnam, the same place where Dr. Ha is currently working. And they and the rest of the crew try to revolt. It goes very badly, and the machine punishes them for a while. However, Aiko figures out that the ship's algorithm needs to keep them in good enough health to extract maximum output, so he convinces the ship to take better care of them, and once he learns about his influence on the ship, he starts talking with Sun about Sun's homeland, and how many fish there are there. And so he sort of influences the ship to go to Sun's homeland. And at the very end, they arrive at the perimeter of the area where the octopus live, and Altan Setseg blows their ship to bits, and only Aiko and Sun survive, and they get scooped up by the Tibetan monk robots before they have a chance to meet the research team. And that's where it ends. I wanted to use this book, since this is our last Octopus book, and talk about kind of where it sits in kind of Octopus literary tradition and what it indicates about where Octopus literature is going, because I think you can extract a lot from both of those endpoints. But also, we are going to have a discussion on, like, how successful it is at the message that it seems to be trying to convey. So, for a lot of Octopus literature prior to, like, 2016, when the whole thing blew up, there were really only, like, two Octopus narrative types, or Kraken narrative types, right? There was either this hidden, sleeping mass in the deep that was, like, coming to get you, the colonizer horror that you can go listen to the Octopus intro to get the full scoop on that. Or you have something like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where we use the Kraken or the octopus, which has been othered and vilified in the literary canon, to sort of pull an Uno reverse and say, look, humans are actually the monsters. And sort of ask ourselves, like, why do these octopus, do they have a reason not to like us? And what does it say about us? You can see how he's sort of setting up the octopus to be this kind of scary, unseen villain at the beginning of the story, and then sort of creates empathy over time through the learning of their language and learning more about their culture.
It's an interesting setup. You know, pulling from Naylor's, like, thriller noir backgrounds, we get this kind of mysterious cold open.
It is a lot like a cold open, because it never comes back in.
We have a mysterious death that is being told to, by a traumatized diver who now no longer lives in the area where this event happened, telling this to a masked stranger. They're in a cheap bar during a rainstorm, so there's a lot of, like, what's going on kind of elements, and let me tell you about this terrible thing that happened. And this mysterious death, like, one of the things that's like, what could be going on? We think it was a monster in the deep, you know, like the diver has no answer for what happened. And then the diver mysteriously gets killed after this conversation. And then our main narrator, Dr. Ha, she's brought into a dark and mysterious island. Again, there's like rainstorm happening, like dropped off in the middle of nowhere, trying to make sense of this like classified video where the octopus appears to be talking. And it's like, dun, 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 like, here we are. What are the monsters doing?
What they learned that the octopus is saying is that they hate humans and want them to get away, right? Because they've, their entire culture is sort of built around threat from humanity. Climate change has allowed them to move into shallower waters. Overfishing has created a threat to their food supply, and so they have to compete with humans for it. And so, no matter how many peaceful ways the team tries to speak to them, their continued response is like, no, fuck off.
But interestingly, there's like the one octopus that gets dubbed the shape singer, because they bring in a disguised drone at one point into the shipwreck and to get more video. And this is where they get like one of the best footages of this speech or this communication that the octopuses are using. And they call it the shape singer because they're like, this seems like, if we would compare it to something in human communication, all the other octopuses are gathered around, a lot of young octopuses, and there's the one that's like kind of like standing, quote unquote, because they don't have legs, but standing itself up and rhythmically performing something.
Yeah.
And this octopus, specifically this one, seems to come back a couple times. We have it like pretending to be a barracuda when Ha is scuba diving in the area and trying to like leave a message, and the shape singer gives Ha a like figurine, and then at the very end the shape singer is actually this mysterious movement in the overgrown algae pool of the rundown hotel they're staying in that I kind of forgot was like there was like movement in the water in like the first couple chapters that was not kept up very well. But then it's like, oh, the shape singer has been here and is like, the other octopuses were attacking and damaging, but this one might give a sense that it's trying to say, I want to try to communicate, and like shows Ha an image of Ha's self in their like communication on the mantle. So like we have like one octopus that is like maybe going towards, I want to try to meet you, but the rest of them are kind of like, fuck off.
Yeah, it's like they're like their equivalent of Ha, like doing her own research and her own recon and like telling stories to other people about her findings and stuff. And so they kind of have a mirror in each other. So that it leaves some hope for potential communication to be established. But over the course of this process, the research team sort of comes to a bunch of conclusions about like, oh, it's our fault as a human species that the octopus are like this. And they kind of come to this conclusion that, like, humanity is evil and they have to try to be better, but most people aren't. And it's a bit interesting. We'll get into that. We also, to kind of hammer home this point, we get kind of a parallel storyline with Evram as a kind of alternative consciousness. So Rustam is actually being hunted by this anti-AI group, this kind of vigilante group, which I have to say feels very weird. It felt very uncomfy to me that we were supposed to dislike this anti-AI group when, like, in the real world, AI is contributing so heavily to people losing jobs, and it's a massive energy sucker. It's a crazy amount of energy that it's using, and it is contributing to climate change, as is, like, things like Bitcoin and whatever. So I'm like, don't love that we're not supposed to be on the side of the anti-AI group, but whatever.
Interesting. I didn't necessarily, okay, I think this is part of the messiness of the Rustam storyline, because I didn't really understand what they were about.
Yeah.
If they were anti-AI or just, like, about control, right? Like, Dianima has all the control, so let's try to take it away from them. And, like, we want to have the control. Or was it, like, wait, which group are you talking about? The ones with the masks or the people that save Rustam?
No, not the people who save Rustam. The people who save Rustam are trying to take control away from Dianima and put it in the hands of, like, an NGO or something. The vigilante group with the masks is just anti-AI, and we get this specific exchange where they tell Rustam that Evram is a monster. They literally use that word, but it's a monster. And so they're trying to get Rustam to find a weakness to hack into Evram in order to destroy them. So Rustum basically turns around and is like, no, you're the monster, and poof, blows up their drones. So we get these two parallel stories that are both sort of coming to this conclusion of like, oh, you think this scary thing that you don't understand is the monster, but actually you're the monster. And when you sort of flip back around and look at humanity, you realize that this mega corporation by Minerva Doter-chan Dianima is kind of like this. It utilizes another octopus metaphor that you see in books like The Octopus, The Story of California, where it's actually not about an octopus at all. It's about the many branching, reaching arms of industrialization and how it's like really impersonal and is kind of taking over everything and controlling everyone. And so you get kind of that metaphor as kind of quote unquote the real villain of the story is Dianima.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when Dr. Minerva Doter-chan like comes to the island and is like trying to make her case, even though Ha is like, don't trust you, the doctor is just like, oh, you know, like I'm here for the science, and like I never meant to build this like conglomerate, and I honestly don't even know like all of our subsidiaries, and like we're being under attack, and like, you know, this other company is like buying out all of our subsidiaries, so we're losing power. That's, I think, where I thought the like Rustum's like employer, like people who are paying him for the project, I thought it was them. That was like, we're trying to just siphon the power off of Dianima because they're like a mega corporation like controlling everything, but not in a like collectivist for the people way, but just like we want to do it we want it to be us instead of them. But anyways, so it's really like Dianima is this kind of octopus analogy, because at the end we get kind of the dramatic irony of the AI ship trawler was actually Dianima's subsidiary property. Like they don't even know all the things that they own and control, and how like, you know, these different arms might be out doing their own things and may not have a lot of cohesion in like a sole mission as an organization or as a company. Instead, it's just built to like consume and profit.
So then at the end, about a third of the way, or 2/3 of the way through the book, that's when the speeches start. And Ha just, every single time this woman talks, she just like goes off on how horrible humanity is. So we pulled some examples. So we have this one where she says, "We are so ashamed of what we have done as a species that we have made up a monster to destroy ourselves with." I think she's talking about robots here. Why people are afraid of Evrim. "We aren't afraid it will happen. We hope it will. Someone needs to take this planet away from us before we destroy it once and for all." So every time she says this, stuff like this, right? You just go, who is we? Who is this we that you are referring to? She makes these grand proclamations about all of humanity are like this. But to me, this analysis, this thing that she's talking about, this kind of wanting to create a robot monster, wanting to create some kind of monster that's going to destroy us and assuage our guilt in a way, sounds a lot more like the kind of colonizer horror that I outlined in the very first Octopus book, very first Octopus episode, where it's like who are the people who actually feel guilt about how the way their daily life impacts the climate? Who are those people? Is that a human trait? Or is that like a result of people living under particular circumstances?
It's interesting because like I think Dr. Ha has like some character growth. Like we have these moments where we haven't even talked about this, but this 0.5, which is a basically like AI partner that contributes about a half a human's worth to a relationship. So it's very enjoyable for the human to like have this like kind of person to talk to and like feel like they're experiencing life together, but without the complexities of like two full people being in a relationship. So we have this, you know, this arc where she kind of realizes like, you know, she's using this as a crutch and she's like hiding in it and she's like not connecting to other people and throws it out. And there's this big dramatic moment. But there's also this sense that like, I don't know how much she's having like new realizations. And the realization she does seem to be having seem like messy and not consistent then with where they kind of end up. So like there's an emphasis in the ending that like we need to stop being indifferent. You know, we need to stop being indifferent about other people. And they kind of like project it on the octopuses too, even though they've spent so much of the book establishing like we can't project our human experiences and symbols and understandings of the world on the octopuses. We need to try to understand them as their own species with their own worldview. But then at the end, they kind of like talk about indifference as if it's a mutual thing that both octopus and humans do and are responsible for. So like the Dr. Minerva Dotto-chan is killed at the end by the octopuses. And from Ha's perspective, it goes, she was killed for nothing. Killed because the octopuses couldn't care less whether she lived or died. She had been killed for the same reason a dolphin, tangled in a tuna net and drowned, was killed. The species that caught her didn't care enough not to kill her. She meant nothing to them. It was indifference that had to end. So we get this sense that, like, we need to end indifference. But, like, the quote you pointed to, Dr. Ha is also like, we are so guilty, we are so wrong. I guess the answer is, like, we should care more, but, like, we don't really get pointed to, like, what should we care about? And that's what I feel like is kind of messy. And to your point, we've talked about, like, as we were prepping this episode, that there's a lot that Dr. Ha kind of speaks to about all humanity in a way that doesn't seem kind of representative of, like, doesn't seem like all humans necessarily would think the same exact thing about the world. And actually there's a few examples in this book of humans who might think differently about things.
Yeah.
But Dr. Ha never seems to really have that realization.
Yeah, and it's like, it feels messy because she is kind of the main character. Like, yes, there's multiple plot lines, but, like, she is the main character and kind of the hero. And a lot of the things that Ha says, well, the worst one is on page 343. This is her opinion of humanity towards the very end of the book. No matter how many people Alton Setseg is willing to kill to keep this place safe, it won't stop more from coming. Not once they find out what is here. Have you thought about that? About what comes next and what that means for the octopuses we are studying? Not even Dianima, with all its international power, can protect them from the world. That world will come rushing in here. It will burst this fantasy world of yours like a soap bubble, and they will be poked, prodded, chased. The best case scenario is they retreat to some place where they can't be found. The worst case scenarios are so much worse, I can't even bear to think of them. This isn't going to be a first contact story where humanity achieves enlightenment because we finally realize we aren't alone in the universe and we all hold hands and sing around a campfire together staring at the stars. We don't have the capacity as a species for a happy ending like that. No, this all ends in the destruction of whatever fragile little society they are building down there, in what is left of an ocean ecosystem we have been systematically destroying on an industrial scale for centuries. It ends with us wiping out yet another species. And this time we will be wiping out a species that has a culture. It won't be an extinction, it will be genocide. And it will happen before I even get a chance to understand them.
I think what feels particularly difficult to me and, like, trying to understand that is that I feel like those statements, and maybe I'm just projecting a lot of my own perceptions and, like, desires for the world and my way of seeing things, but, like, I feel like that's like an early to mid novel statement, and then our character learns something new. But this is really close to the end where we're like, oh, this is where she's pretty much landing. Yeah. But then we also have Evrim at the end, who pretty much the whole book is Evrim and Ha understanding they're on the same team, and they actually have a lot of similar beliefs. And they don't really butt heads a lot. And so it feels odd that at the ending, Evrim has, like, this super different, optimistic, but also kind of like, we're failed. And so at the very end, Ha points out that Evrim has what they need to create another android like themselves. And so basically, like, you are a species because you can achieve reproduction. Yes, Evrim said, I am a species, or the seed of one, but I am not good enough. Not yet. I'm a failed attempt. Someday I will be ready. Once we have the information we need from the octopuses, once we understand what they have to tell us, once we can mesh their view of the world with ours, I can improve upon this faulty model Ankatla built, that's the doctor, and make something truly worth existing on this perfect planet. Something capable of living with all life here and not feeding this constant cycle of destruction. But in the meantime, I have much to learn. All of us do.
So we're just giving up on humanity?
Yeah. It's like very uncertain. I'm like, oh, is this supposed to be a hopeful ending? Or is it like, Ha is like, humans are the worst thing ever. Our time is running out. We'll just research and like, well, not research, but we'll get to know these octopuses as much as we can until like humans inevitably come and like fuck up everything. And Everm is kind of like, there is hope, but basically we're all failed. Our only hope is to like rebuild something completely new. And I don't know how we're going to do that. We have a lot to learn. And that's kind of the ending.
Yeah.
Versus like, I think what feels so lacking is I can see this pointing to like, we need to come together. We need to stop being indifferent. We need to care about each other. Let's have an example of people caring about each other, or like putting the next foot forward to connect to other humans who might also want to protect this species. But it doesn't actually go there. It kind of takes this like random turn into almost like nihilism, like hopeful nihilism at the end.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because like Ha's journey is one on the surface is one from loneliness to connection, right? Mm-hmm. She finds community with people who are very different from her, who she wouldn't expect to relate to, but they end up sort of coming together and building this little team and feeling hope that they can connect with the octopuses and do something different that humanity has done in the past. That's her journey. She like sets aside the 0.5 robot that she's built that's been her only connection for a long time. She's gonna like engage with people directly. That's her journey. But then everything out of her mouth is that all of humanity is inherently evil and there's no hope for it. And we are the only ones who are different, and so we have to do something with what little time we have to protect these octopuses because there's no one else in the world who's going to do anything good for them. And when you literally have these two characters, Aiko and Sun, who Sun in particular is from this land. He's indigenous to this land that the octopuses are on, that they're researching. And he's literally right there. He's like right outside. And they just blew up his ship in order to protect the octopuses. Like, so they're willing, Ha's team is setting themselves up against all of humanity on behalf of the octopuses. So the tone isn't like, oh, connection is a way to start counteracting all of the destruction. What we get at the end is like, oh no, destruction is necessary. It's just instead of destroying the environment, now we need to destroy people and everything they've made. That's the takeaway, kind of. Mm-hmm. It's like very like, wait, what? Wait, what?
Yeah, and I think when you and I were first talking about this book, I'm glad we weren't recording it because it was a lot of us just like sitting in silence. Yes. And then like talking for a very long time and then just like frustrated noises at each other. Yeah. And then I was like, wait, let me try to push back on what you're saying. And you're like, let me try to make up with, let me push back against what I'm saying. And then at the end we're still like, I don't think it holds up. Yeah. I'm like, let's give it a generous critique. Like what if this novel is like, the whole point is to critique the lack of connection, to critique destruction for the sake of protecting the environment. I'm like, and that way it's going so subtle that it's, you know, you really have to sit with it and think about it to find it. But the just like straight up philosophical monologuing is not subtle. And so if you're going for a subtle critique of like, oh, like the dramatic irony of like they didn't know that this ship they were blowing up was actually full of these survivors who had been, you know, punished by this AI system for so long, and who are finally getting maybe a hope at freedom, and like the dramatic irony of them blowing it up. But I'm like, if that was supposed to be a critique of human violence, it's kind of drowned out by Ha literally saying what it came down to in the end was violence. All of it depended on violence. Without that violence, without that devastation Alton Sensei controlled, the world would rush in and destroy all of this. Alton Sensei was right. Killing is what our existence does to the planet. Like, and Ha doesn't really come out of that. You know, that's a little earlier than the ending that Ha has those statements, but she doesn't really change her perspective in a meaningful way after that statement.
And what's really frustrating to me is that Aiko's storyline is a very effective critique of depersonalized systems that are just trying to extract resources and will use you in whatever way. It's an excellent critique most of the way through. There's this part where he's trying to convince the ship to take care of them again. And so he says, or this is the narration, what reaction could he expect from the hardened glass of the wheelhouse? It was a mind focused on cost analysis and efficiency, on minimal expenditure for maximum profit. But that was what Aiko was trying to get the ship to understand, that feeding them wasn't about mercy, it was about value. The crew had a value to the ship that needed to be protected. There was a cost to killing them. Everyone reading this book can kind of relate to, like, you know, convincing your evil overlords to take care of you because of your production value. Gross, right? Or, like, trying to ask for more paid time off because it makes you more efficient, right? We always have to be making this argument to, like, be treated like human beings because we can be more efficient, you know? It's an excellent critique. But then, the end of his storyline is like, well, his ship has to be destroyed in order to protect the octopuses. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So I feel like this is ultimately getting to one of the things that bothers us is, like, the author tries to have these kind of multiple interweaving storylines that connect in these kind of cool and subtle ways that speak to each other, right? And in a way that kind of multiplicity is meant to mimic an octopus, right? Where there's, like, we're not just looking at it from one singular perspective, there's multiple. But it doesn't work super well because of what we've been complaining about.
I think also there's a few things here, right? So if we want to talk about, like, the narrative choices of this octopus novel, the multiplicity of perspectives, like you mentioned, is, like, a really interesting way to think about this, of, like, okay, like, you know, an octopus has multiple arms and they all, you know, have a really spread out nervous system where, like, it's not all centralized in one brain. So, like, what is the experience of hearing all these stories that are, like, tangentially connected to each other as if they have an extended nervous system, which is mostly dianima, that's connecting everyone through this? Fascinating. But the author sets it up in a way that you expect the storylines to intersect significantly. Like, there are a lot of stories that use, like, a multiple point of view narration, and it doesn't intersect significantly. And you really just get small little subtle threads or small little connections of how this plays into a bigger whole. I think of How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Namagatsu, where we get so many different perspectives, different points in time, but all centered around the impact of a pandemic. And some of the characters, you know, glimmer in the background of other ones, but otherwise they all kind of stand alone. This one, the author has woven them so closely and then didn't, like, tie the knot at the end of the braid. So all three are braided together, but they kind of just unravel at the end. I do think Rustum kind of, like, you know, having that moment with Evrim to say, like, hey, I'm, like, closing up the loopholes so no one can hack your brain. Like, you're free. You're in control of yourself. Was really interesting. But another example of some of the most interesting plot moments being told in past tense summary.
Right.
Like,
We get it.
The audience is not with Evrim in that moment. We're in it when they decide to tell Ha about it.
Oh, that's so true. One of the ones that bothered me a lot more than it bothered you was that there were kind of hints in that very first scene that we get, that kind of noir cold open that we were talking about. The kind of masked figure who's trying to get information about these octopuses and is, like, killing people in their wake. There are hints that this is, like, someone from Dianima, and speculation from the sort of narrative point of view about why Dianima would be doing this and what they want. It kind of felt like the entire time everything that we were getting about this faceless villain and everything we were getting about Dr. Minerva, Dr. Tan, was pointing to her being this masked figure, and they were going to kind of unmask her, and it was going to be revealed that, like, she was the villain the whole time, and all of the
a Scooby-Doo
storylines.
moment, if you will. Yes.
Yes! That would have tied all of the... Because Dianima is the villain of all the storylines in one way or another, but with Rostam's it's so complicated, because there's, like, the anti-Dianima agency that just wants to move, that likes all their work but wants to move it to an NGO, and then there's the anti-AI agency, and those two people hate each other, but we don't get to know either of them very well. And then, but Dianima is the one who made Evram, the brain he's trying to hack, and it's just like so messy. All like, who are all these people? And I don't know any of them, and it's like it falls really flat, I think, rather than making it cleaner, of like having Dianima be much more cleanly the villain in all of these stories.
And again, I think like to yes and you, I think that there's some really great stories out there that have complex nuance where you're not quite sure where the villain is or who they are, but that's the point, is the subtlety. But this book is so not subtle in other ways that you're like, well, it was a choice to not flush this out more. And if you're going to be, like, super, like, direct on some of these other things, like, we would expect that kind of directness on who is this masked character, you know, which agency cares about what. If the point is all these agencies are fighting among themselves and no one really has the answer, we should have spent more time on that as, like, a theme than to just leave it where it is, which at this point then reads as kind of messy.
I was so angry when I realized that it was just, like, we're never going to find out who, like, if you put a mask on a character, it's a bit like a Chekhov's mask where, like, the mask has to be taken off by the end of the story, you know? It's like a promise to your readers of, like, ooh, who's behind the mask? And eventually you get to know who it is. And I'm like, Naylor should know this. He writes mysteries. He knows a mask is a promise, but when he unmasks them, it's like people we've never met before and will never meet, and, like, who cares?
I have some Octopus specific questions for you because you have done a ton of research for this series and you know a lot about octopuses. And one thing I found as kind of like a aha moment while reading this book was I'm like, oh, in vampire literature, the author doesn't have to do much to walk you into the world of vampires. Like, the reader comes in with so much pre-existing knowledge of what a vampire could be that the author gets to really play around and just, like, hint at or, you know, maybe even explicitly state, like, it's this kind of vampire, not that kind of vampire. Here we go. Off we go. Story time. But with octopuses, like, these are real creatures in our world with a lot of scientific research behind them, and we're learning more and more all the time. But it feels like in the octopus books we've read together, the author typically has to do quite a bit of work to explain all this scientific understanding of octopuses, which can be very fascinating, but also is just like another layer of writing an octopus novel is like, you have to explain the science to your readers. You can't, at least in the year 2024, expect that the reader knows so much about the, like, actual biology of an octopus and what is being, like, made fantastical by the novel versus what is, like, based in real science. So all that preamble to ask, what did you find was, like, aligned with the current octopus research that you're aware of? And what did you think of the author's choices for things like their method of communication, where we're in the sci-fi realm now because we're doing extra things with our octopuses?
So what's funny is, like, some of the stuff he's referencing is already becoming outdated. And I think this is part of the trick of writing octopus literature, is that, like, we're finally getting a ton of research on octopuses because of the general public's interest. So people will buy books about it and people are getting interested in it. But the entire premise of this book, that octopuses are inherently solitary creatures and that they could only form a society and start to communicate with each other under very specific conditions, is kind of being proven false. So we're not even really, like, the premise of this book, this secret octopus society, is not really, it's just a slight exaggeration of things that scientists are now seeing demonstrated in the wild quite often. The use of language, specifically, and, like, symbolic language with clear syntax, and, like, an attempt to communicate with humans with this language is still sci-fi. But octopuses forming little quote-unquote cities with multiple dens and having certain practices and having certain hierarchies and being social creatures is something that happens quite a bit, actually. It's just that humans literally couldn't see them because they're so good at disguising. And, you know, there's different theories as to why we've seen the ones that we have versus the ones that stay hidden or whatever. But with the invention of, like, underwater cameras, we've been able to kind of watch and realize, like, oh, there are a lot of, like, there are different species that are much more social. And there are some that are much more kind of solitary. But it's not an inherently octopus thing to be alone, actually. And so, like, a lot of the themes of loneliness as being an inherent part of the human experience or the octopus experience doesn't really work. With, like, the collective direction that octopus research is going in. And, you know, they do seem to communicate with each other with their skin in certain ways. Whether there's a symbolic language there is unclear. It's a bit funny now. I think the language that he chose to make based off of visual experiences of the octopus that humans would recognize was, I think, necessary for the story in order for the humans to figure out anything about how their language worked. I found it a little simple, but I was like, you know, they've got to be able to figure it out somehow. So, like, it serves the story. It works, you know? But, yeah, based on the way that research is going, the other thing that's really complicated with octopuses is they're colorblind. So their skin senses color and light, but their eyes don't. So actually, like, that they're able to mimic their surroundings through their skin. Their skin sees things and copies it somehow. We don't really fully know how, but their eyes aren't doing shit. So, like, the way that octopuses communicate with each other would probably be much more skin-based than eyeball-based. And a lot of the language in this book is, like, their syntax is based on the shape of their eyeballs. And, like, I highly doubt that would be the case. Because their eyes are almost useless. They're mostly just for sensing shapes. So I think their means of communication would not be necessarily decipherable to humans. It's also so centralized in a way that, like, I doubt an octopus would think linearly. You know, I think their writing system would end up being much more like what we get in the Arrival movie, where it's, like, outside of time and it's circular and complicated. You know, I don't think they would have a linear syntax. But I think it points to what you were talking about vampires, right? Where there's kind of a common cultural understanding of, like, what a vampire is. So you just have to say vampire and maybe add a couple details of, like, what kind of vampire, and people are fully on board, they know where you're at. With octopuses, because they're real creatures and the research is changing so fast, like faster than we can write novels about it, kind of prevents any kind of one cohesive idea of what an octopus is to form. There's never enough time for that to happen. Mm-hmm. So every writer has to, like, keep up with, like, the new latest thing. And what starts as speculative becomes kind of like, yeah, of course they can do that. You know, this book, I think, is going to be like that in a couple years. It's already kind of going that way by the time it was published. Like, so it makes, quote-unquote, octopus literature as, like, a genre very difficult to kind of form. It's going to take on a very different shape, I guess.
The vampire is often set in, like, historical context. And we can just, like, sure, yeah, this vampire is from 1812. And just, like, roll with it. And then, like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like, what are the implications of this vampire in this way? And, like, just play with the ideas in a way that I think sci-fi can be so playful. But when you are, you know, writing at the edge of research, you are kind of running into some new storytelling and artistic decisions to make around, like, where do I divert from the research and what's going to feel like at the core still a very relatable story for readers, even when the research extends beyond or in a different direction than the novel does. And I think ultimately, like, I mean, there's some sci-fi, like, we've read Ursula K. Le Guin, right? From the 60s. And it stands up because it's talking about humanity and society and like reflecting on how we as humans make decisions, how we experience the world, how we think about our place in the universe. And I think this book tries to situate the reader into a larger conversation than just what's cool about an octopus. But because of all the reasons we mentioned, that it kind of falls flat at pulling all the braids of the conversation together, it leaves us with a kind of ending as far as like conversation about the human experience, and also kind of like, oh, cool, but we'll learn more kind of feeling about the octopuses. Because as a non-octopus scholar, I'm like, oh, this is a fascinating take. And I do think the conversation around how humans can and will be forced to check our ego when trying to communicate with a species that's different than our own, whether it's an alien or a species on our own planet, that part I think will hold up, and that's fascinating. But that is honestly not quite big enough of a piece of the book for me to hold on to. It's like, this is super important literature. Instead, I'm like, feels flat in a couple ways, very interesting in the moment, may not hold up, kind of where I end.
I think ultimately, I think this book is a great example to sort of look at how octopus literature is evolving and will continue to evolve, because by not quite achieving its goal, it sort of reveals what all the goals were and how they kind of operate and what the goals of a lot of octopus stories are and may continue to be over time. It wants to be like, humanity, we need to put ourselves aside in order to have more connection and in order to connect with things that are different than us. I think it's trying to be like a post-human ethos of a book, but the philosophy of all these speeches that's so on the nose that we've complained about, and the way that the plot lines don't quite resolve themselves in a cohesive way, it feels like the book is unable to actually see a new perspective and actually embody something other than humans are the monsters. All humanity is evil. It's unable to imagine anything else, even though it's trying so hard. It's unable to be influenced by the multiplicity of the octopus and ends up getting stuck in Ha's perspective in the end anyway. But by not quite being able to achieve this, you can see what it's trying to do. It's interesting. I'm curious to see how this literary trend will go, how successful it will be years down the line of like actually managing to figure out how to embody the octopus in its narrative structure and in its philosophy, and like actually get outside of the brain down, top down, hierarchical, capitalistic way of looking at conservation, of looking at relating to animals. Will we be able to get out of it? Will future authors be able to get out of it? And I'm very curious and excited to see what people come up with.
Yeah. I am also super curious on this meta level that as long as it's a story written by a human, will we ever achieve that goal? But maybe it's something we just keep chipping towards until someday the octopuses tell us their story and somehow we figure out a way to translate into our own understanding.
An excellent question. Can we? Yeah. What are the actual limitations of human nature versus what are the limitations we're currently under because of like the current social order? Yeah. It's fascinating to think about. I think the best octopus literature is going to come from a non-Western author. So bring it on, guys. I'm excited.
All right. So for people who enjoy The Mountain and the Sea or are done with hearing us critique it and just want to move on to something else to read, what would you recommend they check out next?
So I'll say, if you want to dive more into the theory behind the book, You want to check out Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith and Biosemiotics, An Examination into the Signs of Life and the Life of Signs by Jesper Hoffmeyer. I haven't read the second one, but it sounds fascinating. Mm-hmm. So those are two books that were very foundational for the philosophy and the analytical angles of how he approached the book. If you want, like, this kind of meta-analysis of humanity and capitalism and relationship to nature and stuff, go read Ursula K. Le Guin. Go read The Queen. There's no one better. Pick any book. That's what I would say.
Yeah. If you are interested in reading about how to think about our relationship as humans to the rest of the natural world, I really appreciate the insights of reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you're curious, I think for more kind of first contact stories, you got to read The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. Such a great short story, the movie Arrival is based off of. Also fantastic adaptation of a short story. We also did an episode on it where we just kind of sung its praises for an hour. Because we both really liked it.
Well, because and obviously it's a short story, not a novel, but the adaptation as well both manage in their structure, in the way inherent into the way it's written, embodies the new language that it's trying to describe. Mm-hmm. And I won't give any spoilers about it, but I think it accomplishes that goal much more successfully.
Okay, and to wrap up, what are you obsessed with? What is bringing you joy?
Guys, the Interview with the Vampire Season 2 finale! Oh my god, I watched it like 4 times yesterday. We were supposed to record yesterday, and I was kind of like, oh, thank god, I can watch this episode now, and also for the rest of the day, instead of recording, because, my god. It's been renewed for Season 3, and I'm very excited about the direction it's gonna go. I'm just, I'm on top of the world, man. I've also been very obsessed with this podcast that I think was, like, engineered in the lab specifically for me and for literally no one else on the planet.
That's great.
Called Walkin' About. And it's this niche comedic actor from one of my favorite TV shows of all time that almost no one watched, called You're the Worst. And he's this, like, chill, very slow talking guy who takes his friends on walks throughout Los Angeles and talks about public infrastructure and, like, walkable cities and, like, all of my favorite things. I don't know if anyone else is listening to this show, but I am obsessed. So I'm really glad it exists.
I'm glad for your sake that it exists as well.
Thank you. How about you? What have you been listening to?
Lawrence released a new album called Family Business, and it's fantastic. I've been enjoying that on repeat. Still Woozy just put out a new album called Love Seat. I've only given it 1 listen so far, but I really liked all the singles that came out beforehand, so I'm excited to get into the rest of the album. And like I mentioned, I found Jasmine Guillory's The Proposal in a little free library near me, and it's just like a delightful little romance. It's in the same, like, world of Friends as The Wedding Date, which was kind of the book that put Jasmine Guillory on the map. So it's about one of the friends in The Wedding Date is a main character in The Proposal. And it's very LA, so I do enjoy, like, the locational references. Okay.
Well, that's the end of the Octopus part of the series. So next time we're going to have our last vampire book.
She keeps saying this like I'm not going to, like, twist her arm into doing this for the next 3 years where we only talk about the vampire and the octopus. But don't let her know. Well, we just might pop back in.
We're going to run out of vampire books. Or not. We're going to run out of octopus books. I was like,
you want to run out of vampire books? I've got 25 mediocre ones we could go through. I know. We will take a break. We will have some other exciting episodes coming after this season. But I don't know if I can stop thinking about vampires and octopuses. It might be a while. We might have to find a new series for me to really sink my teeth in.
I should redirect your attention. Or we'll just, like, have a running series where we throw in vampire books.
2028, The Vampire Returns. This has been an episode of The Vampire and the Octopus, a special series from Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our members who keep the show going. You can support the show and also receive access to exclusive bonus content, including our film club, newsletters, and archive of the first 50 episodes of the show at buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjb. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, and Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Thubland. We want to know what you're reading and your bookish thoughts, so you could reach us at our website, bookclubwithjb.com, on Instagram at bookclubwithjb, or by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. We'll catch you next time. Happy reading.